Okay. Oh. Well, Christina needs no introduction to this audience. To any Society for Academic Freedom and Scholarship audience, Christina is well known, giving us
notorious,
giving us a talk a year or so, and very good. Christina's teaching now at Kwantlen Polytechnic University in British Columbia. Are you teaching next term, or is this your term off?
No, I'm teaching next term as well.
So you'll be
and I was actually also teaching for UBC one course.
Teaching for UBC one course?
Yeah, so 5 courses this term, yeah.
Teaching 5 courses this
and
term.
it can be done.
Christina's talk tonight, University Administrators Creating Problems That Have No Solution. Christina Behme.
Thank you all for coming out on this miserable evening. So when I had the idea for this talk, I thought, well, this should be very easy and very straightforward. I just talk a little bit about the mandatory courses that we all have to take nowadays. But then when I started to actually prepare for the talk, I realized that was kind of like a rabbit hole. And the stuff that is going on at universities, and not just at universities now, is really mind-boggling. So I will talk very briefly about the history of diversity training. In the beginning, they were actually dealing with genuine problems and making genuine progress. But nowadays, we're really just battling pseudo problems. And unsurprisingly, there are a lot of people that claim that we're not really making any progress. However, this has become a really thriving industry. And the general idea seems to be, so if we're not making any progress, then we have to do more of the same. And more of the same, yeah. So some of those things seem to be really mission impossible. So I will be talking a little bit about that. I will be talking about one case in Vancouver, where on the one hand we were told that we had an explosion of hate crimes. But on the other hand, we also were told that crime hasn't increased in decades. So it's like, okay, what actually is going on here? And I will even briefly at the end mention COVID. Okay. So for decades now, equity, diversity, and inclusion initiatives promised to make Canadian universities and, of course, also Canadian workplaces more inclusive, so that they are welcoming to students, faculty from diverse racial, ethnic, gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation, disability or ability, and religious backgrounds. And you probably can add a few more to that. On the other hand, in spite of that, activists claim that racism, xenophobia, sexism, and also things like Islamophobia remain really common in our universities and workplaces. So obviously you have to ask, so what is actually going on here? Now what I am suggesting is that most of the currently existing EDI programs address pseudo problems. And they seem to be there for one reason and one reason only, and that is to ensure perpetual need of a small, or by now it's not longer that small anymore, army of administrators, consultants, and EDI instructors. EDI training also has become a lucrative business that employs mostly people that are trained in our universities. And they seem to be making quite a bit of money off that. In order to address actually genuine problems, I suggest there would be fundamental changes needed to EDI, but I'm not very optimistic that that is happening anytime soon. Now, it's actually interesting that the first modern equal employment legislation was introduced in the United States in Congress in 1943 during World War II. And in 1948, President Truman signed an executive order number 9981 to desegregate the armed services. And apparently this thing was quite successful. So it required equality of treatment and opportunity in the armed services. And by 1953, 95% of African American Army soldiers were serving in integrated units. So from those completely segregated, only black people and only white people units, we had by 1953, 95% of the black soldiers were actually integrated. Now, that doesn't mean that racism was completely eradicated. However, it obviously was a huge step in the right direction. So a serious problem, racial segregation, was addressed, and at least when it comes to numbers, also solved. Now, workplace diversity training first emerged in the mid-1960s after the introduction of equal employment laws and affirmative action. So at that point, a lot of employers felt a need, felt compelled to have programs that trained their employees in diversity and would help them to adjust to work in a more integrated workplace. Now, unfortunately, or I probably should say the Americans call it DEI, we call it EDI, and then there are, of course, people who call it simply DI. So unfortunately, all those training programs of the past have struggled to yield substantial improvement. And usually when that happens, when you have a program that doesn't work, at one point you say, okay, what should we do? Maybe we should try something completely different. This is, however, not what has happened. The solution seems to be more and more of those programs. DEI, which was once seen as a subcomponent under the Human Resources Department, has now evolved into a core business function that large and small businesses alike have been aggressively investing in. So the more companies have been told that there are problems with diversity in their workplace, be it sexism, be it maybe that there are racial tensions and so on, the more they actually have invested in those programs. There's a sharp increase in hiring numbers of so-called professionals of DEI, who apparently also don't seem to produce any measurable gain. 90% of CEOs agree that DEI is a personal, strategic priority for them. Chief Diversity Officer is now at many executive boards, so it's no longer just Diversity Officer, it's a Chief Diversity Officer. And there's a rapid increase in consulting firms who specialize in DEI consulting and related services. And of course, they all make money. Okay. So in 2019, there was a survey about equity, diversity, and inclusion at Canadian universities, and here are a couple of the findings. So there is a mobilizing a full spectrum of ideas, talent and experiences is essential to creating a higher education and research ecosystem. What the heck is that? Are we now like growing little diversity things at universities that responds to changing Canadian demographics and global challenges? Doing so helps building an innovative, prosperous and inclusive country and creates institutions that are responsive, nimble and able to ensure the next generation can navigate a fast-paced, changing world. There are a lot of words here, but if you ask me what are they actually saying, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot here. And that is obviously part of the problem. Universities Canada launched its first ever comprehensive national survey in February 2019 to make EDI data available for benchmarking and to better understand the current EDI institutional landscape, enable members to compare results and share promising practices, and inform Universities Canada's advocacy and capacity building activities. Universities are prioritizing EDI action plans, strategies and policies, the recruitment and retention of diverse talent among senior leaders, faculty, staff, students, and reconciliation and indigenation. Well, that stuff also is now added. But the higher education community must continue to do more to advance EDI and demonstrate progress over time. So that means more of those people need to be hired, obviously. 77% of universities currently reference EDI in their institution's strategic plan or longer-term planning documents, and 70% of institutions either already have or are in the process of developing an EDI action plan. The data show that there are common challenges to making progress. A lack of resources. So in other words, we need more money to hire even more of those professionals. Difficulty attracting and retaining diverse talent, including in senior leadership. So it seems to be the case that even given that there are a lot of job offers now directed specifically at the target groups, that it is difficult to find people who actually apply for those jobs. Apparently not everybody is happy to be hired because of the color of their skin or their gender and not really because of their credentials. But it also turns out that there are people that have been hired because of those initiatives. They don't really feel that appreciated in the workplace, they feel isolated and so on. Institutional systems, policies, structures and cultures that can hinder progress, so that are probably nasty people like Mark Mercer who will send letters to university administrators complaining about hiring decisions that are not based on merit. Allegedly, there's a lack of data on institutional challenges. If you search for those kind of things on the internet, you can only like throw up your hands and say, what do they mean by lack of data? They do study after study after survey after study, and it's mind-boggling, really. Okay. and apparently insufficient information on best practices for EDI. Okay. Now, let's look at EDI courses that are offered by Dalhousie. And those are courses that are not offered to employees or students who have to take those things mandatorily as well, but we at least don't have to pay for them. Those are courses that are offered to either the general public or to employers that want to get their workforce trained. So you can get a certificate, for instance, Equity, Diversity and Inclusion. This explores the struggles organizations face in achieving equity, inclusion and harmonious environments. Through participation in the certificate, learners will explore ways to create safe spaces to engage in real dialogue, policies around fairness, respect, and civility, and strategies for navigating sensitive issues related to diversity and inclusion. Each course requires a minimum of 12 hours over 3 weeks and costs $650 each. So you have to take at least those 4 required courses. In other words, the certificate will cost you $2,600. Now, I would assume that most people or most employers that send their employees to take those certificates probably will pay for that. But it is definitely a great way to generate additional income for universities like Dalhousie. So required courses include Understanding EDI, an organization imperative, micro-credential in organizational inclusion. And this is something that is right now offered. So you really have to ask yourself, is there still anybody out there who doesn't know what equity, diversity and inclusion actually means? Inclusive communications in the workplace, micro-credential in inclusive communication analysis. Optimizing diverse team performance. This is a micro-credential in diverse teams. And strategies for implementing EDI initiatives, micro-credential in EDIA strategies. Right, but then you will be delighted to learn you can take individual courses, so you don't have to do the whole certificate. If that is too expensive for your organization, you can send people to take a course like Workplace Diversity and Inclusion, explore the concepts of diversity and inclusion, reflect on your own lived experience and draw connections between diversity and inclusion and the success of business and their employees. Well, that only costs $795. It is delivered online, so essentially once this course is kind of set up, it runs itself. Dalhousie doesn't even have to commit an instructor to that, like in real time. Time commitment, 12 hours at your own, oh no, this was 36 hours over 12 weeks. And here's a real bargain, interrupting unconscious bias. Now, a lot of psychologists have pointed out that this unconscious bias training, or however you want to call it, is a huge scam. Because it's not that we are unconsciously biased against people, it is the way the questions usually are asked. So this is a 12-hour course that can be taken at your own pace. It will have you looking inwards and digging deep into your beliefs, bringing them to the forefront so you can explore the ways in which your biases impact how you interact with others. And for doing this digging deep inside, you have to pay $575 to Dalhousie University. And then there's Understanding Diversity and Inclusion. Participants in this course will spend time discovering insights into their own values, beliefs, and behaviors with respect to diversity. The intention is that participants will examine diversity in adult education and develop competencies to integrate diversity in their practice. Cost you only $650. Now, all of that actually reminds me of the things that we were exposed to in East Germany. So we were constantly bombarded with how wonderful the Soviet Union is and that we all ought to love people from the Soviet Union. Now, the funny thing is, without that constant bombardment, probably most of us would have at least a neutral position to people from the Soviet Union. And the moment you visited there, you always were sure to encounter at least some nice people. But if somebody constantly tells you you ought to love those people, then you are more likely than not to develop biases against that. And this is essentially exactly the same going on here. So all this mandatory training that is going on in universities and workplaces, but there's no progress. Now, obviously, people that are concerned about academic freedom may already be a little bit upset that we all have to take mandatory courses anyway and engage in a way in compelled speech. But one might say, okay, if that really has a good outcome, if those mandatory sensitivity and inclusion training sessions result in safer and more diverse workplaces, then compromising academic freedom might be justified. However, after decades of those initiatives, one would hope that universities and campuses are actually safer and more inclusive. But apparently they are not, although we are told. Take, for instance, sexual harassment. So we all have gone through countless hours of taking courses on sexual harassment or avoiding of the same. However, the majority, 71% actually, of students at Canadian post-secondary schools witnessed or experienced unwanted sexualized behaviors in a post-secondary setting in 2019, either on campus or in an off-campus situation that involved students or other people associated with the school. Okay. 45% of students who identified as women and 32% who identified as men personally experienced at least one such behavior in the context of their post-secondary studies. So it seems that all this training that we're doing is not really delivering any results. Look at racism. According to Deckard and et al., students are exposed to systemic racism across Canadian universities, discriminatory treatment during adjudication proceedings, and professors cavalierly using racial slurs in their lectures. I'm not really sure what they refer to there, because I'm pretty sure that anybody using like the N-word in a lecture probably would not teach anymore, but so those are published articles. Students, staff, and faculty at some of Canada's largest universities say they have experienced anti-Black racism on campus and were targeted if they spoke out about their treatment. Okay, so what has actually been done to address those problems on campus, for instance, anti-Black racism? Well, there were days of white absence, for instance, at Evergreen College in 2017. That got a lot of media attention after some professors actually left the university because of that, and in 2018 they cancelled the day of white absence. But that doesn't mean that it is not continually going on at other universities. So, for instance, at the University of Virginia, students of color request spaces free of white people. So the Campus Diversity Center was visited by diverse students, it appears. But apparently black students were not happy with the fact that there were actually white people showing up at the Diversity Center. So a gal there, a student, was giving under much applause speech where she said, this Campus Diversity Center is a space for people of color. So just be really cognizant of the space you're taking up, because it does make some of us uncomfortable when we see too many white people in here. Okay. Doesn't sound very inclusive to me, but who am I to judge? Students of color also request safe spaces on campus, like cultural centers, meet and greet events that are specifically for black identifying students, student engagement activities specifically geared to students of color. And so they always get very upset when somebody points out that this seems to be a form of voluntary segregation, because they say this is entirely different from segregation. But at New York University, students demanded that the university implement black student housing on campus, so they want floors that are completely comprised of black identifying students with black resident assistants and so on. And Dalhousie now also offers a white fragility clinic. It also seems to be something geared towards really making the university a more inclusive place, I guess. It's actually kind of scary to read that this is an accredited, or as an accredited provider, Dalhousie University designates this continuing professional development activity for up to 1 credit hours as an accredited group learning section 1 activity as defined by the maintenance of certification program of the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Canada. And to be quite honest with you, considering the state of our healthcare system, I would much prefer if our surgeons and physicians could do their jobs versus spending time on dealing with white fragility, to explore in a safe and non-judgmental space issues including the concept of whiteness and its role in racism, and to build and practice racial resilience in attendees. Okay, what else do we have? Mount St. Vincent and Dalhousie actually teamed up. A safe space for white questions. In February 2020, Dr. Alex Kazanaspis from Mount St. Vincent and Dr. A.J. Parasram from Dalhousie began an experiment they called Safe Space for White Questions. They host recurring drop-in sessions aimed at white identified people to ask difficult questions about racism, white supremacy, social justice, and so on. Participants can ask questions in real time or submit them anonymously if they wish so in advance. So I was listening in because I thought, well, I identify as a white person. Let's see what they have to say. So session 16 started with a really drawn out segment about cultural appropriation. So what had happened apparently a young woman had married a guy from India, and her mother-in-law had gifted her some traditional outfit and then insisted that the young woman actually wears that thing. And she did so, and when she was at her workplace, somebody was accusing her of cultural appropriation. And so then this guy was going on and on and on and on about that. So that are the kind of things that our universities are teaching the public now. It turns out that not everybody is happy about how racism has more and more focused exclusively on black, maybe indigenous people, and completely ignores other races, like, for instance, people from Asia. Especially Japanese, Chinese, Korean people feel that they are considered to be white adjacent. So that means that they're not really entitled to complain about racism. Why is that? The main reason really seems to be that people of Asia, of Asian descent, are overrepresented at universities, are doing extremely well at universities. I'm not surprised, since I moved to Surrey, I actually experienced that a lot of the students that come from Asia, but also like from India, Pakistan, and other countries like that, they come to Canada to work really, really hard. And so it's unsurprising that they get good grades. So Asians are now frequently considered so white adjacent that they are no longer identified as people of color, as if they were no longer subject to racism. But some people have pointed out that this mix of privilege and exclusion gives them a unique position from which to advocate for anti-racism and the dismantling of structural and systemic racism. The often cited bamboo ceiling, I have to admit I had never heard this word before, but apparently it's a thing, describes a real structural disadvantage for Asians. Asians face aggression on a daily basis. We have all been called by the wrong name. We are regularly asked where we are from. By the way, I'm also regularly asked where I'm from, where my accent is from. And now that I live on the West Coast, I usually respond, I'm from Nova Scotia. And people will ask me, in Nova Scotia they speak like that? And I say, well, I mean, if they have to ask, they obviously have never encountered somebody from Nova Scotia, and so I suspect there's now a growing number of people in British Columbia who think this is how Nova Scotians speak. Yeah. We are subjected to racist jokes and comments. Yeah, as if Germans were not subjected to comments about our culture, and so on. But we are often excluded from diversity and inclusion efforts. But then they actually make a really good point here. Asians are treated as a monolithic group, despite comprising more than 19 groups speaking over 38 languages. So I will actually return to that towards the end of my talk. So here's a real dilemma for the EDI industry. If they really admit that over time our universities have become less racist, sexist, homophobic, and so on, then eventually the need for EDI training will disappear. I mean, it's not like right now we have to have mandatory anti-slavery training at our universities, because nobody really believes that slavery is a good thing or that we should bring it back or stuff like that. So if you have actually solved a problem, then the need for all this education just goes away. On the other hand, if they continue to claim that our universities are as bad or even worse than they have been in the past when it comes to racism, sexism, homophobia, and so on. Eventually, one would hope they can no longer justify those training activities, because eventually people will say, okay, if we spend all this money and there is no result, there is no improvement, then we just have to stop this. We have to stop wasting all this money on something that obviously is broke. So this is the dilemma that they are facing. How are they doing, or how are they trying to get out of that dilemma? Well, I think what they're really doing is they invent an increasing number of pseudo problems, like microaggressions, cultural appropriation, lack of safe spaces. Now, decolonization is a big one. And I say pseudo problems here for a reason. When you have a well-defined problem, like for instance, desegregation of the United States Armed Forces, then you also have success criteria. So yes, you can say in 39, we only had black groups of soldiers and white groups of soldiers. And in 1953, 95% of the black soldiers were actually integrated. So we made progress here. If you talk about things like microaggressions, I mean, first of all, a lot of people don't really know what it means, because it depends on the individual who feels microaggrieved. And I guarantee you that you will never reach the point where there is nobody ever microaggrieved. Especially if you have instructors that give you tasks like go out in the world and find examples of microaggressions or examples of systemic racism and so on. The same with cultural appropriation. So there were student protests a few years ago because at one university around Christmas time there was a white student singing this Pocahontas song from the Disney movie, and that was considered to be cultural appropriation. So yeah, if you are out to find those examples, you always will find something. So what are we doing? We are feverishly working on so-called solutions of those problems. And they seem to hope that most people will mistake movement, and there's a lot of movement. There are lots and lots of courses, and new words are invented almost daily for progress, which doesn't seem to exist, because otherwise we obviously wouldn't need all of that anymore. So yes, just keep the funding stream going. Now those familiar with the Bible are familiar with this saying, teach a person or give a person a fish and he will eat for one day, teach him to fish and he will eat for life. Yeah, teach people at universities how to actually deal with insults, microaggressions, however you want to call it. And eventually they will become independent, resilient people. Teach people how to constantly be offended, insulted, and aggrieved, and you have a lifelong job protecting them. And that is really what seems to be going on there. And one example, obviously, is how universities are dealing with so-called hate speech. We all are familiar with the proverb, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Now this has become a big no-no at Canadian universities. And we have rewritten this proverb in things like sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will destroy my mental health to the point where I will suffer from anxiety for the rest of my life. Or sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can also hurt me. Sticks and stones break only skin, while words are ghosts that haunt me. Pain from words has left its scar on mind and heart that's tender. Cuts and bruises now have healed. It's words that I remember. So in other words, students are now really encouraged to be offended and to see themselves as helpless victims. And of course, there are people out there that exploit that. So the It's Okay to Be White movement has taken off and continues to be extremely successful. And you really have to let this sink in. That you now, all you have to do on a university campus is utter the words, it is okay to be white, or post a couple of stickers like that, and there will be students that will feel completely paralyzed by that. And of course, people who want to exploit that have greatly succeeded. So essentially what our university students are being taught when it comes to how to deal with microaggressions is that you are in fear waiting for the next time somebody will insult you. And obviously that is a problem that nobody can solve. You cannot make sure that a student will never ever encounter on campus somebody who says something unkind to them. It's just not going to happen. Right. So, what is actually going on? Now, I suggest that this entire EDI industry is focusing on the wrong things. And it reminds me of something that way back when I did my driver's license in Germany, my driving instructor told me. He said a lot of people get into frontal collisions because they look at what they need to avoid. So when we are driving, we're usually staring ahead, and usually there's nothing coming at us. But if there's a car coming at us, we are usually staring at it, paralyzed, and our hands usually follow where we're looking at. And he said, what you really have to do instead of looking at what you need to avoid is you need to look where you want to go. So how can I get out of the way of that car that is coming at me? Now, EDI programs nowadays look at what we need to avoid. Find more examples of systemic racism. Find more examples of sexual harassment on campus. Find more examples of xenophobia, and so on. Now, a good driving instructor, as I said, will tell you what you really need to do is look where you ought to go. So, don't reinvent all the wheels. Because in spite of what a lot of those EDI people are telling us, our universities compared to the universities of the 1950s are a lot more inclusive than they ever have been in the past. Women are treated with a lot more respect than they have been treated in the past. Students of color are treated with a lot more respect, and there are a lot more of them now than there were in the past. Remember what worked in the past. Remember actually what the acronym stands for. And find examples of equity, diversity and inclusion on your own campus, in your neighborhoods, and learn from them. So, what's going on in the EDI industry? The wheel of intersectionality. Now that divides us into ever smaller segments of groups that feel, for whatever reason, that we are oppressed and that we have it even worse than all the other people in here. So you have here things like settler. English and French are their languages, really. And so on. So you can find yourself a point on this wheel, and then you can compete with everybody else. What is the result of that? All the people that feel oppressed will feel isolated. There's nobody like me, nobody who can relate, nobody I can trust, nobody I can learn from, and so on. So there is a rapidly increasing number of categories that divide us. And this increasing division within oppressed groups prevent cooperation with the other. Because now it's also like within the black community. So black women are more oppressed than black men, and black trans women are more oppressed than black cis women, and so on. Focus on differences, and that often comes at the expense that you no longer see actually a common goal, a more inclusive university. Now, I said we shouldn't reinvent wheels. There are so many people in the EDI industry that call themselves Marxists. It might be good for them to remember one of the things that Marx actually got right. Marx and Engels actually got right. Proletarians of all countries unite. If you really want to succeed, if you really want to get rid of the oppressors, then you have to unite with others. The most progressive class can only free itself by overthrowing the existing system of oppression and by freeing all classes that are oppressed. So not divvying out groups of oppressed people as is done in this intersectionality business, but actually focus on what is our common goal here. The oppressed people have to set aside their differences and focus on the common goal. So this goes all the way back to Marx and Engels. What is actually done by, for instance, trans activists? Instead of focusing on equality and inclusion, they focus on inequity and they promote hatred. So for instance, this term TERF, Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminist. And by the way, nowadays it is no longer just used against radical feminists. So anybody can be a TERF, as J.K. Rowling found out the hard way. So it's a slur that is used against an ill-defined but rapidly growing group of academics, but also people of the general public. And essentially it's used to invalidate any position disagreeing with the extremist trans agenda. And I want to be very clear about one thing here. I have absolutely nothing against trans people. And I know that a lot of trans people, all they want to do is they want to live their lives and be left alone mostly. However, there is a handful of activists that have taken it upon themselves to speak on the behalf of every trans person. And that is my target. So people like Rachel McKinnon, who now goes by Veronica Ivy. I want them TERFs die in a grease fire. So McKinnon tweeted that, and unsurprisingly, a lot of people were not happy about that because they took it literally, which you kind of do when you see something like that on the internet. And then McKinnon, and I mean, those are the kind of people that say that you harm somebody beyond repair when you use the wrong pronoun. So saying to somebody, I want you to die in a grease fire is perfectly okay. Because apparently it's something that is used in poker games, in online poker games. And I was actually asking people, so are you familiar with this term? People who don't really play poker have no idea that this is apparently very common there. And then I finally found somebody who actually teaches all the philosophy in the States, and he said, well, my son-in-law plays poker. I asked him, and so he asked the son-in-law, and he said, yeah, I have heard that. That's not really something you say in good company to somebody else. So apparently it's not quite as innocent as McKinnon wanted to make it sound afterwards. Pick your battles if you consider yourself a trans ally. Now is the time to start throwing your bricks and becoming an accomplice. It's all from McKinnon, and when people again took that seriously, again it was pointed out that wasn't meant literally. Yeah, but if somebody mentions, not uses, mentions the N-word in a lecture, that is enough to get those people fired. Then there's a word that I asked Mike when I was working on this, if he was familiar with it, suspicious. So this is kind of like, obviously it comes from suspicious. Cis are normal people, I guess. No, I actually have to say I find this term cis men and cis women rather offensive, because what it refers to is assigned at birth their gender that they're still identifying with. That actually is not correct. Nobody assigned a gender to me at birth. They were just looking at me and were saying, this is a girl. Assigning gender at birth only happens to a tiny, tiny, tiny number of babies that don't have actually obvious boy or girl parts. So those are the only ones that get assigned at birth a gender. So it's actually incorrect to say cis people have been assigned a gender at birth. Okay, here we go. Anyway, so I'm suspicious of non-trans folks who express alliance with trans folks, be they queer, gay, lesbian, bisexual, pansexual, asexual, and or heterosexual alike. So in other words, everybody who still identifies with the gender that they were assigned at birth, but has whatever sexual orientation is, to be treated with suspicion, entertaining a healthy suspicion of the ally industrial complex in transgender studies. Yeah, that sounds also very inclusive and very inviting. And then we have cis takes. So obviously this is a play on mistakes. Yeah. Oops. Right. Now we can, again, we don't have to reinvent wheels. We just can remember what the great Martin Luther King told us about loving our enemies. Loving your enemies, far from being the pious injunction of a utopian dreamer, this demand is an absolute necessity for the survival of our civilization. Yes, it is love that will save our world and civilization. Love even for our enemies. Now, I'm not suggesting that we ought to go there right away, or that would be even possible. But it is a good thing to actually remind people who constantly talk about equity, diversity, and inclusion, what great people in the past actually have said about that. And it helps, obviously, that he has a preferred skin color. Instead of actually looking for inclusion, there are more and more initiatives now that are actually aimed at adding to this wheel of craziness. So now the acronym is Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Indigenization. And we have to invest, obviously, the money has to flow in Indigenous students, staff, faculty, and use their feedback to provide an environment that supports their work, considering how pedagogy and research methods, including assessment of research merit, need to be re-evaluated in order to move beyond settler paradigms. So listen up, Mike. So settler paradigms that are based on merit, we have to get beyond that. They disadvantage Indigenous students and scholars. Now, this may sound wonderful, but it is actually incredibly insulting. It is incredibly insulting to Indigenous students and scholars to say that a system that is based on merit disadvantages them, because it essentially claims they are not smart enough to make it in our universities if they are evaluated on the same basis as other students, without any evidence. They are asking for a transformation of the existing academy by including Indigenous knowledges, voices, critiques, scholars, students, and materials, as well as the establishment of physical and epistemic spaces that facilitate the ethical stewardship of a plurality of Indigenous knowledges and practices so thoroughly as to constitute an essential element of the university. So again, we don't just have now a mandatory course in Indigenous studies, it has to become the core function of the university. And Western approaches to knowledge production will need to be pushed back while Indigenous approaches to knowledge production are simultaneously being strengthened in the center. The goal is to enable Indigenous worldviews to take up more space throughout the entire academy. Yeah, good luck with that when it comes to medicine. And just another word of caution here. We had already encountered that when it comes to Asian people, that it's not a monolith. There are all kinds of different groups within this basket where we throw all the Asian people in. Same with Indigenous people. So obviously the people that live here in Nova Scotia, the Mi'kmaq, are hugely different from the people that live out at the West Coast, and everybody in between. So having just one term for Indigenous people and for their ways of knowing, in a way, is also rather discriminatory. Now, Murray Sinclair, the chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, said way back in 2015, reconciliation will not occur overnight. This is not just a problem for Aboriginal. Back then we were still allowed to say Aboriginal people. It is a problem for the entire country. Canada has a shameful past. But we don't need to carry this shame any further as long as we commit to a relationship of mutual respect. Now, obviously, if you teach courses like white fragility, you are not fostering mutual respect. So maybe just maybe it's time to listen to people like Sinclair. And of course, people outside the ivory tower show us how to do it. This was somewhere in the United Kingdom where foreigners face the same problems that foreigners face in Canada. And they face it in English-speaking Canada, and they face it even more in French-speaking Canada. Speak the language. If you want to live here, if you want to work here, speak the language. And so those people actually very creatively responded. Yeah, we speak English and Punjabi and Lithuanian and Urdu and Polish and a whole bunch of other languages where we are sure you guys have no idea about. Now this is, if you teach students to respond like this, then yes, they will become resilient, they will become creative. And at one point they will no longer need you to hold their hands. So I promise to talk briefly about what counts as a hate crime, because that is a word that is thrown around so frequently. So in Vancouver, police in February, that was 2021, reported a 717% increase in anti-Asian hate crimes over the past year. So that was a big announcement, and everybody was just talking about how horrible that is and how awful and so on. Now in 2022, actually just at the end of October, Vancouver elected the first Chinese Canadian mayor. And that was a guy, Ken Sim, who had campaigned actually on not poor us, but on a law and order platform. And he had promised to hire, I think it was 100 or 150 additional police officers to deal with crime, especially in East Vancouver, but also in Chinatown and in other areas of Vancouver. And he actually won in quite dramatically. So you would expect that everybody in the Chinese community was happy. You would have expected that everybody who was complaining about the massive increase in anti-Asian hate crime was happy. However, just a couple of days after he was elected, CBC interviewed two criminology experts from two universities in the Vancouver area. And those guys claimed that there has been no increase in crime in British Columbia over decades. So we don't need any more police officers. Okay. So what about the 717% increase in anti-Asian hate crimes? Something is off kilter here. And then they also interviewed somebody from a Chinatown resident, and she said, I know that the Chinese Canadian community is really excited about the first Chinese Canadian mayor. I just want to point out that just because somebody looks like you doesn't mean that they actually are going to take care of you. Oh, so this whole stuff that we constantly have been told that we need to hire black university teachers so black students will feel welcome, or Asian teachers so Asian students will feel welcome. Now they are telling us not everybody who looks like us is actually doing what we want them to do. Interesting. Wait. Yeah, I think I already mentioned the lesson from the little bird in a previous talk, but I just love this one so much, so indulge me. Once upon a time, there was a non-conforming sparrow who decided not to fly south for the winter. However, as soon as the weather turned so cold, like right now, that he reluctantly started southward. In a short time, ice began to form on his wings and he fell to the earth in a barnyard almost frozen. A cow passed by and crapped on the little sparrow. Now, cow crap has many bad properties, but it's nice and warm when it's created. The sparrow thought it was the end, but then the manure warmed him and defrosted his wings. Warm and happy, able to breathe, he started to sing. Just then a large cat came by and, hearing the chirping, investigated the sounds. The cat cleared away the manure, found the chirping sparrow, and promptly ate him. So what are the lessons from this tale, you may wonder? Not everyone who dumps on you is your enemy. It's a good lesson for students. Not everyone who gets you out of deep crap is your friend. So yeah. Oh, and I promise I will say something about COVID. The COVID vaccines. So just in case people don't remember anymore the big excitement about the COVID vaccines in early 2021. Pfizer and BioNTech told us data from the phase 3 study demonstrated that although protection from the vaccine appears to begin as early as 12 days after the first dose, 2 doses of the vaccine are required to provide the maximum protection against the disease. A vaccine efficacy of 95%. We all remember those early days when we were all so optimistic. So we get vaccinated and then COVID will be a thing of the past. Fauci said in June 2021, having about 50% of adults fully vaccinated and about 62% of adults having received at least 1 dose across the US as a whole means, as a notion, I feel fairly certain you're not going to see the kind of surges we've seen in the past. Yeah, those were the days. It actually turned out that the protection goes down over time. Nobody told us that in the beginning. Researchers found that protection against any COVID-19 infection declined for all vaccine types, with overall vaccine protection declining from 87.9% to 48.1% by October. So that are a mere 8 months. And also notice 87.9, it's no longer 95%, but those are minor details. So the decline for Pfizer-BioNTech actually was 86.9% to 43.3%. So what did we need to do? Get a booster shot, get more of that stuff. So by December 2021, we were handing out booster shots, again, first for the most at-risk individuals, but by now everybody should be at least on your 2nd booster. Are you all? Right. So now the recommendation is every 6 months, get another booster shot. Okay, that would all be very nice if the number of hospitalizations would actually go down. Is it? No, it's not. It's going up. So this was at the beginning of the pandemic. Yes, there were a lot of people in hospital, but then we managed to flatten the curve. Remember those good old days? It was before any vaccines. And then we had this horrible spike with the Omicron, or with the arrival of Omicron. But now we have a version of the vaccine that is specifically geared against Omicron. And so it seems similar to what is going on in the EDI industry. If it doesn't work, just take more of it. Okay. Thank you very much for your attention.
Christina, of course, we'll take questions.
Yes. Yeah.
I suppose it's more of a comment. I think I see the issue. We're noticing that there's all this talk about EDIA and these EDIA positions and funding, and we're hearing things are actually really bad, and trying to work out why. And I do have an explanation for this that I teach in my organizational development course, and it's because the EDIA in organizations is performative. So it's not. The EDIA practitioners themselves can be very passionate and they can really believe it and really want to change things, but the administration that hires them doesn't empower them to do that. So I'll give you the example of my institution where there's a lot of virtue signaling and land acknowledgements. And we're in Chipuktuk and Turtle Island, and you can't go to any meeting without that. But in reality, the administration puts all these posters up about, like, we're on unceded land and we're in Mi'kmaq, and they're SME branded. And those are not put up by the Indigenous folks on campus. They're put up by the administration. I had a conversation with an administrator that made it clear that the reason they do this is because they have an enrollment problem, and they think part of the problem is there's a declining birth rate in the province, and this is the group that has a high fertility rate. So performative EDIA is about getting folks and putting them into positions so that you get more customers, right? So it's kind of like, let's say we're going to open a bank in a black neighborhood. We want black customers. We should have some black bank tellers. But that's not the same thing as like letting black people into the inner circle. And so what my institution does is it takes the EDIA practitioners and it makes them student advisors who are like 5 levels down from the president. But if an institution is really sincere about EDIA, and we call that the, I think, integration approach, then they'll be reporting to the president. But they don't do that. They put them way down the hierarchy. They have no real power, but it looks to the student like, oh, well, there's a sexual violence advisor, there's a sort of policy, but in reality the policy is performative, and anyone who goes and reports harassment and discrimination can expect to have a really hard time and to be treated with cruelty. But that's not what's in the policy, right? The policy is that doesn't happen, and we're so diverse, and these are the policies, and right, and it's all just it's kind of a sham. And
sure,
so I think,
but the problem is that with that interpretation is that if that were the case, if it's just a sham that isn't doing anything, things shouldn't get worse.
So it is,
but according to all those activists, racism is getting worse, sexism is getting worse, and so on.
It's just covering up for the toxic way things are. Nothing's really changing, and it's not supposed to change.
Right. It's not supposed to change. Exactly, because
things are getting worse, and the EDI practitioners that I know are very angry about it.
Well, I mean, the problem is that, or there are a couple of problems. The first one is, as I said earlier, things, or what counts as sexual harassment now is very different from what counted as sexual harassment way back in the, let's say, 1960s. So there is an inequality there. We are comparing completely different things nowadays. And that's why we are saying it's not getting any better. If somebody right now would do something to you on campus that was kind of okay in the 1960s, that person would go to jail.
So 2 things there. First of all, I think you're right about that, you can change your prevalence rates by stretching your definitions or your period prevalence, looking at like percent today versus a month versus a year. So I'm granting you that point. However, in an organization that's hierarchical and power-based, complaints are political ammunition. If I were to go to HR at SMU and say that Mark looked at me the wrong way, they would love that, okay? Right? They would eat that right up. But people who report rapes against people who are powerful and protected are treated viciously, threatened with expulsion.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter if you were actually raped and you try to report somebody who's politically protected,
Yes.
you're going to have a horrible, horrible time of it. But a vexatious complaint against Mark would just sail, right?
Right. No, I agree with that when it comes to sexual harassment, it doesn't seem to matter so much what the action was, but what type of a person the
And whether the
harasser was. So if the harasser was like, I mean, this famous in philosophy case of Colin McGinn, everybody was up in arms and horrible guy. And then Peter Ludlow did something that in many books was actually a lot worse. But people, and they actually told me that, yeah, but he's a nice guy. We don't want...
protected, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it didn't matter what the student actually claimed.
Yeah. It's about who's protected.
It mattered what... You are absolutely right, yeah, and that obviously is frustrating. But that, in a way, doesn't really work into the claim that things are getting worse. Because this kind of stuff has always existed, that there were some people that would get away with everything and others that wouldn't. What may have changed is the type of person. So maybe in the 1950s it was more the Trump kind of types, and now it's more the politically on the far left that get away with that. That may have changed, but the thing itself hasn't really changed that much.
Yes, I think we're looking at a few different things, like changing definitions, changing period of prevalence. And then I think in certain places things can get worse. I'd say where I am, things are bad, and they are probably getting worse because every cover-up leads to another cover-up and more intimidation and more. But people who report things are treated like a threat to the institution. And there's a policy that's a lie. It really goes to the university lawyer, who then picks holes in the case, and the person gets intimidated. Like, what happens is actually horrible. But you can't market yourself like that.
Right, but see, this is exactly the problem that I pointed out earlier. So when...
So I think the inconsistency is that the organization's EDIA is a sham and a lie. It's performative. And it's really a legalistic organization that wants to defend itself from lawsuits and will treat people viciously in order to intimidate them into not speaking up. And then it does all kinds of virtue signaling.
Right.
And it puts people in these sort of fake student advisor positions.
So essentially, if we continue to claim that our universities are bad or worse, as you just did, then we would have to say, okay, all this EDI stuff that we are doing, that performative stuff, isn't working. So we should stop doing that.
No, we can't say it's not working.
But exactly.
But it's never supposed to work. It's just a performance. It's just image.
Well, I wouldn't be quite as cynical. I think initially those initiatives actually were intended to really train us to be more inclusive of people that we didn't know and that kind of stuff. I think initially they were.
Maybe,
but
what really matters is the reputation of the brand and enrollment.
Sure.
Money.
Sure. Money, yeah. Other complaints, questions? Yeah?
Well, I wanted to know a bit more about the courses at Dalhousie and other places that you were talking about. Just to be sure, these aren't courses offered by departments. Are they as part of an academic program leading to, say, a bachelor's degree or?
As far as I understood, those courses are offered like if you are an employer. Mm-hmm. And you want diversity training for your employees because maybe somebody has complained in your organization about sexual harassment and you have been told you have to train your employees and you have never done that before. Then you can get the certificate or that other stuff.
I've been in universities for a long time, but it's always something I know so little about these institutions and what's going on. Because this sounds to me like the sort of thing that you would find at not an academic institution, but maybe some type of college where they are specifically aiming at consumers of some sort of expertise. They want the institution wants to be there to respond to market needs, to train people, whatever. But this is happening also at universities are taking on this role. And so the instructors in these courses do not enjoy academic freedom, I take it. They're not members of the regular faculty.
I think anybody can teach those courses if they want to,
Right. So it's
if they have the qualification.
So it's outside the university aspect of the university.
Right. So this wouldn't be courses that you teach like in your 3-2 course load per academic year. But I mean, I know there are a lot of university instructors, especially part-time instructors, that always look for additional ways to make money. And for instance, McKinnon was advertising that when she was still at Charleston,
Yeah.
in the States, she was advertising that she was for a fee offering to organizations courses in inclusivity for trans folks and that kind of stuff.
Professors do that sort of consultation, especially in psychology. But okay, so these are training programs housed at universities, but outside.
You can inquire. I can send you the webpage from. So I'm not 100% sure, but you can pretend that you want to take one of those courses and find out what they require of you.
Right. Okay. But and yet they would trade on having a university imprimatur. That would be sort of the draw.
Yeah, obviously. So we can now say that our employees are trained by Dalhousie University or something like that. And so obviously I would suspect that UFT probably has even more of those because they have a bigger names. And as you have seen, they were all online. So I assume that is something that started out when the pandemic forced us all to stay at home, and so people are looking at additional ways of disseminating knowledge, settler ways, I would say.
The other thing I want to talk about was, or ask you about, was the white fragility course. I have no objection to someone teaching a course in their department on white fragility or bringing white fragility as a topic into the course. But I take it the white fragility course you were talking about was one of these courses on the side of the
Yeah, and that was at the Department of Medicine, and that is actually offered as part of like physicians and surgeons. They have to do this kind of ongoing training. And so that was offered as part of their ongoing training. It's like right now with the healthcare crisis that we have, that is the last thing those people should be trained at.
Well, I'd go more the waste of money route.
Well, either way. But I mean, they usually don't have to pay out of their own pocket for those courses. And
that's waste of the Canadian taxpayer.
Right.
Preaching to the choir, because the only person that would sign up for that is woke, right?
I got more the impression that this is, again, something your employer signs you up for, and then you have to take it whether they want it or not.
I couldn't imagine anyone choosing to take that wasn't already into.
But they made a point out of, I think, only 15 students per term could enroll or something like that. So they made it sound as if it is something really, really special. And you are really special if you're allowed into that course.
Christina, one question. a lot of the condemnation is directed at Western civilization, but how accepting are other civilizations of diversity? It seems that we in the West are much more accepting of that than people from other cultures are.
Right, that is one of the obviously really, really big problems that is never really mentioned. And I mean, we see it right now with what's going on in Iran, and we also see it, unfortunately, when it comes to how we are dealing with protests in Canada. And I mean, you can think about the trucker protests whatever you want to, but it definitely didn't seem to be something that needed the Emergency Act invoked to be dealt with. And yet we have a prime minister who vigorously defended that, but who is now telling everybody that the people that protest in China against the government should be supported and should have their rights honored and so on. I mean, the number of people in China who is not protesting is probably equally big as the number of Canadians who were not interested in the trucker protests. So it's a minority of people who are protesting in China and who want to overthrow the government. That is their stated goal, and they're probably a lot more serious about it than the truckers were about overthrowing Trudeau. And so those kind of differences, yes, they are mind-boggling. And I think in a way it's unfortunate that this is kind of training us to accept those things. Because when you ask a question like you just did, usually if you don't ask it in a forum like this, but out in a university, you immediately will be labeled as racist and settler and colonizer and God knows what, yeah. And I mean, it's also like when you talk about like immigrant experience. I'm an immigrant. And I have been told many times by all kinds of people that I should go back where I came from. So I know what that feels like. But of course, I don't really look like the immigrants that a lot of people think are discriminated against. So nobody cares about my experience, about me being called a colonizer, about me constantly being asked, so where are you from? No, I mean, where did you really come from? And I hear that all the time, you know. And I mean, I have to admit, in most cases, I think it is people have a genuine interest. They detect an accent in me and they want to know where I'm coming from. And yes, I could be offended if I choose to do so. And if somebody would tell me about the anti-German biases in Canada, I probably could go around and find all kinds of examples if I wanted to. And I think that is probably one of the things that I haven't mentioned in this talk, but I think I mentioned it in a different talk, that I find so frustrating. That essentially students or also scholars that are part of minority groups are being encouraged, not just encouraged, but essentially forced to constantly feel outraged and angry. And it's like, I don't want to live my life angry. Yes, if I wanted to, I could go out and be angry all day about all kinds of things that I consider to be unjust. But that's not really a nice life to live. And why people are doing that to students whom they claim to love and protect and fight for, it's beyond my comprehension, to be honest with you.
I think the problem the left has is that they claim that they love humanity, but it's based on a group identity. They love humanity as a collective, but when it comes down to the individual, they don't much care for the individuals.
It's actually worse than that, because, and you can easily find evidence for that. If you are a member, for instance, of a so-called protected minority or whatnot, but you don't play the role that they assign to you, then they treat you even worse than if you are like a middle-aged, white, straight man. Because you are supposed to play this victim role. And if you are standing up and saying, I'm a black guy and I'm working hard and I'm proud of what I have accomplished and I'm grateful for the opportunities that I have been given, then in a way you are kind of like a traitor of your race or something like that. And that is just so utterly bizarre that people, and in my opinion, that has nothing to do with being politically on the left. That is just insanity, sorry. If people genuinely are on the political left, they care about the well-being of others, not based on agreement with political positions, but based on, well, poor people. People that have disadvantages, genuine disadvantages, not that somebody when they passed in a hallway looked at them and they couldn't identify why they were looking at them and that kind of stuff. But so to me, this kind of left versus right, that has left the building a long time ago.
But if you're right about that, maybe your analysis isn't quite accurate. You were suggesting that one of the motives of EDI initiatives is to combat racism. But it's not to combat racism, rather to promote group interests. Or
well, I mean,
to bring resources to people who identify as members of certain groups.
See, I mean, one of the problems with this EDI stuff as it is done right now, and I mean, I agree with you, it's performative, it's also incredibly paternalistic. Because if you are a member of a disadvantaged group, you have to feel oppressed, whether you like it or not. And if you say, well, I'm
not oppressed by race, but oppressed by the lack of resources to your group for the things that your group would like to pursue.
Yeah, but see, this is, I think you said it about individuals versus groups,
yeah, no,
you know.
That's right. That's my point.
Right. But I mean, the thing is, there are members of disadvantaged groups, like for instance black scholars, that really feel that because they are the only black person on campus, they feel isolated, they don't have anybody to talk to and so on. So that's, I think we have to acknowledge that that is a real experience, but it's not the experience of every black person on campus.
But what is the experience of this black scholar? Is it that there are no other scholars interested in the things that he or she is investigating?
The only one at the department, the only one at the whatever work groups they are a member of and so on. And I mean, okay, if somebody tells me that, I say, okay, I can understand that you feel unhappy. But as this Chinese person then was pointing out, just because somebody looks like you doesn't necessarily mean they have the same interests. So it could very well be they hire another black person in this, let's say, department, and those two don't get along at all. So it's worse than if they had hired instead somebody from Asia, or, you know.
Well, if the problem is something like narrow academic tastes, then that's a problem.
Right, right.
But I don't see how it maps onto things like race, sexual orientation.
But I mean, the problem, narrow academic taste, is one that we all have, regardless of what.
Oh no, each of us individually can have the narrowest taste. That's fine, but the institution, I think, that has a
Right,
responsibility
but
to
I mean,
the students and others. But I come from a philosophy department, and I think philosophy isn't about philosophical traditions, about philosophical problems. And but I take it there are some disciplines where it's something like we should have, where diversity in academic taste would have to do with representatives of different approaches or something like that.
right,
But I
right.
don't mind if there are no phenomenologists in my department. But it does matter to me that there are people investigating this problem, this problem, this problem, this problem,
Yeah, yeah.
even if it's no individual person.
Right, but that doesn't really seem to be the problem of those black scholars, at least what I have read, who have spoken out about feeling unwelcome and not being included because they're the only black person, let's say, in their department.
Yeah, are there
Because
some
that-
scholars? Is this,
Apparently there are, and I mean, if somebody tells me that, then but I'm the only East German in any department I ever have been a part of. And so on one level, I cannot really relate to feeling bad about that, And obviously, I speak with a pretty strong accent, and so people constantly will ask me about it. And so if I just cannot relate to this. But I have to admit, I have met people in Canada, people from Germany, who told me that they feel that they are not really liked here, and when they tell people here what we do in Germany, then they at one point get told, then why don't you go back to Germany if you like it that much? And so, yeah, I mean, but I think that seems to be more a problem of individuals. Like, when I immigrated to Canada, I left Germany behind. I didn't expect that here is now a little Germany growing around me. But there seem to be immigrants that feel that we have to essentially continue their traditions here in Canada. And so that might be a problem.
no, go ahead.
I did not account for question periods when I booked the ARMS. We have a reservation for 8 p.m.
Oh, okay.
Should I get over there so that I can?
Well, we've got an hour and a half, so I think we should wrap it up.
Yeah.
Last question.
Any more questions?
It's on you, Caitlin. Last question.
Hey, I'm the newbie here.
Well, thank you very much, Christina.
The Lord Nelson Hotel. So that's on the corner of Spring Garden and, is it South Park? It's a big brick building, and so it's inside the. What was this being recorded? I couldn't tell if that was ours or not.
Yes, it's been.
Oh, yeah.